All right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining. So we are going to talk about experience. It's definitely been flirted with, talked about a little bit, but this session is going to be all about X. It's the competitive differentiator, whether you're talking about employee experience or customer experience or making good experiences for your partners. So what does this mean? What is the impact of these things that we've been talking about, the autonomous enterprise, the generative enterprise, which is our new coined term. So without further ado, I'd like to invite my panel up to join me. Great. Well, thank you all for being with me today. So not only do I have an esteemed panel of great business leaders, I also have the panel with the most fabulous shoes. Could I ask you guys to just go down quickly and introduce yourselves?
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, my name is Fiona Blades, and I'm the founder of a company called Mesh Experience.
Hi, I'm Margaret Molloy. I'm the Global Chief Marketing Officer of Siegel+Gale. We are part of Omnicom, and we're a brand strategy, design, and experience firm. And thank you for having us, Melissa.
Hi, Maureen Doyle-Spare. I lead the financial services team at UST. 25 plus years experience in this sector, leading consulting and solution teams across many of the service providers. And thanks for having me today.
Good morning, my name is Mike Small. I'm the president of Akkodis Americas. In this role, we focus on IT and engineering, consulting and services, and I'm also a dual hat role. The Adecco Group is our parent company, and I am the chief executive of Adecco US.
Great, thank you all for being here. So let's dive right in. We'd like to start with some audience participation, if we can do that. We do have a poll. All right, so we want to talk about how the autonomous enterprise has an impact on experience. So we heard the last panel talk quite a bit about getting your infrastructure right so that you break out of silos, knowing your interactions and processes, having leaders understand their data, know their data, and all these things that lead towards efficiency, working smarter, more intelligently. But what sort of impact does it actually have on experiences across the ecosystem? So significant impact, improvements to processes will elevate experiences across all types of stakeholders, or very little because it's more about cost and efficiency focus, or just some impact. Processes must be carefully designed. Okay, I was waiting for some impact to come in. Now we've got a quarter are at some impact. It's kind of going up and down. Well, it's unanimous that there is going to be some impact, it looks like so far. So let me get you guys' thoughts on this. What do you think about the question and the responses?
Well, I agree. I think there's going to be significant impact. So I saw the question and I thought, absolutely. And I really think it is an opportunity to elevate experiences. And I think if companies don't do that, they will fall behind competitors. So I think it's an absolute imperative that, that companies are looking at elevating their experiences.
Super. Margaret?
I agree with that assessment. I think the interesting variable is over what period of time. And it'd be very interesting to take this as a snapshot and then do at other intervals, because the pace is so much faster than we've seen, at least the pace of the hype, than with other developments. The way I think about it is along two dimensions. The first is, and it was discussed this morning, around efficiencies. How can our customers, or as I prefer to say, people, have better experiences with brands that are more efficient, less friction, more useful? So that's in one bucket. The other bucket is around effectiveness. How can the technology be deployed to better predict or anticipate people's needs? And those are the two areas that I think about as a framework where the impact is going to happen, how it's going to happen, and the unknown is when.
Fantastic. Maureen?
Yeah, so, you know, I think it comes down to both the data quality and the back-end application systems. While the customer experience itself can be elevated, I think if the friction still resides in the middle and the back office, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. and as elevated as the overall experience and as, you know, to easily navigate, I think, you know, the frustrations of the experience really come out when the integrity of the data is there, there's latency in applications, and the whole ecosystem isn't really working together.
Yeah, good point on data. And lastly, Mike.
I couldn't agree more. You know, when you think about, you know, I've heard a lot about back-end, middle office and the integration and data quality, and the opportunity that we have there is immense. There's no question. But just one quick example, we just put a autonomous maintenance program in place for a fleet management software company. And just listening to the client and the friction points that were being experienced in their legacy system, applying those learnings to this fleet management software from an impact perspective has been tremendous in terms of their entire revenues that are generated from this platform have increased now 2x. It's been implemented for 3 months, you know, and that all started with, it's a completely autonomous system where their fleet management software now is predicting where their fleet needs to be, you know, the effectiveness of the maintenance programs that they have in place. So when you're listening to the clients and they're seeing the value of these, the power of the systems that we can implement are tremendous in this area.
Great. Yeah, and that's a really good segue, because I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about how you know, leaders themselves can take some steps to think about experience when they are actually implementing autonomous enterprise solutions and so forth. So maybe Maureen, I'll ask you to start on that one.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, you know, employee and, you know, customer experience are really basically two sides of the same coin, so to speak. You know, human and autonomy is not independent of each other. It is together. One is not ever going to replace the other, and it's understanding when the human interaction is important. Usually it's in that last mile. And then from a leadership perspective, how do you integrate that into your organization? You know, often, you know, you look at clients and they'll come in, or you know, many of the service providers, you know, customer experience is a silo within an organization. Our clients, it's a silo in the organization, and it's not, you know, tightly woven with the domain as well as the intelligent automation, and really being able to look at it from a true customer experience. Many times, a lot of firms are really kind of, they have a technology that is looking for a use case, rather than, you know, changing the paradigm back again, because we've kind of gone a little too much of, you know, chasing the hype and looking for the use case for the technology versus trying to go back to the roots of the fundamental problem and the experience and the friction, and figuring out which technologies really make sense to weave together to improve that experience.
Yeah, very good. Good point in around friction, because it's all about reducing effort, in particular customer effort. So that actually, you know, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on how we can think about this in a more holistic way, because we've seen some data and we have some more to share today as well about how connected employee experience is with customer experience. So when you're looking at this, you know, from a big picture standpoint, how do you develop something where these experience programs actually align?
Maybe I'll get started on that. I think the guiding principle is along the lines of the service profit chain, which is to say, if employees are having a good experience, it gets reflected in the customer experience. So it sort of begins with what is the guiding principle that informs the strategy. And I think, to Maureen's point, a lot of people are looking for ways to use the tech and not doing the analysis to discern what do people need. So starting at first principles, I think, is vitally important. The other aspect is, from my vantage point, around your brand. What does your brand stand for in the hearts and minds of all people, be it employees, customers, stakeholders, users? Because very often the one who buys your product isn't the one who's using it. And that's a particularly common phenomenon in B2B. So really trying to identify, what do we want to stand for? How can we be useful? I would say that's one of the most powerful questions. to any stakeholder. How can we deploy technology or any other methodology to be more useful? Because when you're more useful, you're inherently removing friction, and the user, the people, are having a better experience. And I think the real opportunity is to begin at the beginning. People are somewhat beginning in the middle or being seduced by the technology and trying to retrofit it, but beginning with, as Maureen said, the humanity. I think that's an important starting point.
I completely agree with that. You know, we're in the human capital business, and in the human capital business, if I'm not deploying human capital to projects or solutions or clients, I have no product, I have no revenue, I have no means of driving my business model. And one of the things that we started with at the beginning was the candidate experience, which in many cases in our businesses was horrific. So you start by listening to the candidate, and what they basically said was, we want the opportunities to be presented these types of projects, these types of experiences. And when you're able to understand the candidate's needs up front, guess what? Our success rate, our fill rates are going to be a lot more increased when we're putting them on projects that they're actually passionate about, that they actually want, as opposed to being spam every 2 minutes on LinkedIn to try to fill a potential role. So that was the first thing that we did. We digitized our front-end experiences associated to the candidate. The second thing we did was listen to our clients and said, if you want diversity, equity, inclusion in terms of a roster of candidates, we can provide that, but there's a way of doing that where we can actually, you know, help marry your needs with the candidate's needs. And by listening to our clients, we've been able to now increase diversity in our populations in terms of candidates that we're putting in front of some of our largest enterprise clients, and actually strike up partnerships like most recently we've done a partnership with 110 and Delta Airlines, where we were able to listen to the client needs and understand their diversity goals and actually automate capability where we're able to actually drive more candidate throughput for Delta Airlines. That's going to give them more diversity roster of candidates. This is how, you know, and where I'd like to see that is how will we have this fully automated? So it's not building it specifically for each client, but being able to have this more of a repeatable process across the board. But this is where technology plays an instrumental role.
Yeah, that's a great example. I worked in staffing for quite some time, and I remember our focus actually in marketing was to the candidates, not to the clients.
Exactly.
Even though they weren't paying us, they were the service or the product. But that pays off in spades because they're the happy ones, and they're the ones that get a great experience, and then they go to work happy and makes the clients happy. So let's talk a little bit about what motivates people. In this particular study, we looked at employers as well as employees. So this is what you see on the screen on the left-hand side is what employers thought was most motivating for workers, and on the right was what the workers actually said. So the top response for staff was being empowered to make decisions. So a couple things that I want to point out about this. One is that it seems like there's a bit of a disconnect between what employers are thinking is motivational to employees. I mean, they think the top one is access to tech and being recognized for accomplishments, which of course are very important things, but not the top ones. So there's a bit of a gap there. And the second thing I'll say, which came up in the last panel, was how is generative AI, automation, how are these things benefiting employees? Or are they replacing employees? Are they augmenting? Are they actually helping them be more empowered to make decisions? So I'd like to hear from the panel on what you see the role of tech around empowerment for decision making. Mike, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure, I'll start. I think examples and storytelling is the best way to illustrate this. What we heard loud and resounding in our organization is, if you're not going to develop me, we'll find an employer who will. Flat out. So our number one focus is on colleague development. Okay, and that's where we're making investments, and that's what we're trying to build specific curriculum around what our colleagues and candidates want. Second thing we heard was, what are you doing for the second place candidate? So great that you placed the first place candidate, but what are you doing for the second and third place candidate? Are you giving them information on why they were the second and third place candidate? And what we did there was specifically look at, I'll just use one area that we do a lot of work in, development. So development is my number one category. Globally, we place thousands of development engineers and development resources around the world. When we specifically test for areas of competency around coding, depending on the technology, we can pretty clearly see through these tests where the developer needs work. And instead of basically just saying you were not the chosen candidate, we're now saying here are 2 or 3 areas that you need to work on. And by the way, here's the technology and the learning modules that can address those gaps. Now you do that, they're going to continue to come back to your ecosystem and continue to play. But how did we connect those dots? It's all through now an autonomous system that basically is working behind the scenes, grading them as they're coding, and basically linking it back to our learning modules in terms of where they think and where they do need to develop in terms of work. So again, an example of listening and connecting technology to help overall improve the overall ecosystem.
Oh, good example. Let's talk a little bit about measurement. And Fiona, I want to pick your brain on this one because I know you have quite a bit of experience in how you measure this. So what are some practical ways that companies can measure experience as well as the investments that they're making in tech around experience?
First of all, I think many companies are already doing some measurements. So, for example, we've just spoken about Delta Airlines. We've had the pleasure of working with them, and I know they're really big on diversity, actually. So that's good to hear your information. But they would send an email after you've got off a plane, for example, and you'd be answering a little bit about that experience. So I think many companies are already picking up some of that information. And after each experience that somebody may have had, I think what's more difficult is to look at the total customer experience. And that's really where we come in to fill a bit of a gap, because we ask people to tell us whenever they see, hear, or experience, for example, anything to do with airlines. And then we'll understand, well, what are the percentage that are using the app? What are the percentage when they're speaking to a friend or colleague about where they're going to fly? What about the email coming in? What about the TV ads? What about all those different touch points that people are having? And I think that this is something which we're finding is helping on the question that came up earlier, which was on silos. Because you've got people measuring the CRM program, you've got people measuring the PR, people measuring the media efficiency, people measuring the ad, the TV ad. But actually what you want to see is how all of this is fitting together. And we feel that if you do have what we think is it's small data really, but we have participants who are capturing these experiences every day and feeding back, it means that you can then speak to your organization and say, well, look, this is where the social media is fitting in, and this is how positive those experiences are for our brand versus competitors. But let's look at the TV. Well, it's doing something different. So I think that's an area that will become important in the future. There was a brilliant article that was written in Harvard Business Review quite a while ago now, and Keith Weed, who was the CMO of Unilever at the time, wrote that article, and he felt that share of experience would be the most important marketing metric of the future. So that's where I think things will go, but I do think there are lots of very, very simple ways of monitoring things. If we're looking at metrics to do with employees, then your retention rates. If you do a survey once a year to find out how people are finding the experience, all of these metrics are really important to take note of.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's about not looking at it in a vacuum, about one particular interaction that I had or one particular experience. It's about how I'm experiencing the brand as a whole.
Yes, I think so. I think you should do both. So let's understand the individual bit, and that's almost easier. So do try and do that if you've got an event, or I was thinking when you were talking about the employee experience, we did something called our Meshiesta last August, because we work remotely now, but we wanted a way of everybody getting together. And, measure those things individually, but then start to have a look at the total experience. Because of course, thinking on financial services, somebody could have just seen some negative news about branch closures, and then they're then interacting, or they're seeing a TV ad, or they're then going onto their app. And those earlier experiences are going to impact on how people feel at the time that they're having an experience, for example, on an app.
Yeah, good points. And talking about how people feel, there's another point that I want to get to. And Margaret, I think I'll ask you to weigh in on this one. I didn't think of it while we were looking at this data point, but now that I'm thinking through, I want to get your thoughts on purpose. So being connected to the values and mission of the company, we were surprised that that came in pretty low on motivational factors. So either from an employee or a consumer standpoint, what are your thoughts on how brand purpose fits into this whole experience thing?
It's an interesting time for brand purpose, and you referenced 110 and Maurice and all of those folks have a tremendous brand purpose, particularly around DEI. I think in even the last 2 years, we've seen purpose shifting from being, yeah, every brand's got one, you gotta have one, to, oh my gosh, it's all about brand purpose. And brand purpose, to define the term, is essentially why an entity exists in the world. And there was, back when many of us went to business school, the conversation was around shareholder value. And it was all about Wall Street returns. And the premise of that point of view was, if we look after Wall Street, if we essentially return profits, everything else comes together. And that primacy of shareholders was deemed to be the glue that dictated the success of the firm. And that dates back to Milton Friedman in the 1970s and many of our training in business school. Well, over the last 2 years in particular, with be it George Floyd or the pandemic or the deep concerns around the environment, that conversation's been in flux. And there was a time where the conversation became all about stakeholder value. So it's not just about the shareholders, the employees, the regulators, the community. So brands were rushing to articulate a brand purpose that was very inclusive. And the point of view was employees, particularly Gen Z, but of all generations, want to work for a company that's doing good in the world. And that was the prevailing point of view. Curiously, I've observed in the last 6 months or so a little bit of a shift, particularly in the capital markets, where there's the notion that we may have over-rotated on purpose. And someone mentioned Keith Weed. It's interesting, a seminal article in the Financial Times talked about a Unilever brand, specifically Hellmann's mayonnaise. And I don't know the particular individuals, but Hellmann's was leaning in strong to the environment. And the investor community was saying, wait a second, you're a premium brand. Your purpose is to make leftover chicken sandwiches taste good. And that's why you're commanding a higher price than the generic in the supermarket. So we're in a really interesting place, Melissa, in purpose. It's shifting. I think where I net out is it's not the Holy Grail, but it's essential to have an ownable purpose, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think, there's a little bit of prove it to me from our colleagues, yeah? Because, we heard, especially, I'll just use like high-tech examples, like culture. We have a great culture, we're absolutely the place to be. In the last, 3 to 6 months, culture. I've got a text message saying I don't have a job. So there are some legitimate areas where we as employees and employers can just take a pause and take a step back here. We talk about, the purpose in the Adecco Group is to make the future work for everyone. If we're not living that every day, then our clients and our colleagues and our stakeholders will call us on it, And believe me, I believe that there are times where we live it every day, and then there's times where it's like, yeah, that was really dumb. Those times that we do things that are really dumb, it is so critical to actually acknowledge it and be transparent, and then tell our colleagues what we're going to do, what learnings we've taken from it. So, we just did our latest Pecan survey results, ENPS, NPS for our colleagues. And I looked at the number, and the numbers look pretty good. But then I dig into the numbers and I look at the comments, and the comments are absolutely brutal. And it took me a little bit back, because it's like, why are the numbers, at 8.6 or 8.9, but yet our colleagues are telling us we're full of what in like areas that are really linked back to our purpose. And we spent the last 3-4 months going through that data and trying to understand it in more detail, roundtables and all that good stuff. And what primarily came out is we've done a very poor job in this new hybrid working environment of continuously communicating the importance of our business, the importance of what we do to change lives. And we've taken steps to try to address that. So I think, going back to measuring how we do things, prove it to our colleagues, prove it to our stakeholders. What are you doing to, when we actually get the gift of feedback, to internalize that and then come back to them and show them and demonstrate that we're actually listening?
And I think the employees then buy into that.
Exactly.
If you're measuring them on that purpose, then they believe in the purpose. They deliver to that purpose.
100%.
At UST, one of our ethos is transforming lives through technology, and we actually measure that to the employee level. And so that, you get the employee buy-in to the overall experience and what you're transforming, not just within the organization, but for the end client.
So important.
Great. Yeah, you brought up the hybrid environment piece. That came up on our talent panel yesterday, where it seems as though, hybrid is, it's the norm, but we still haven't quite figured out how to do it. And Malcolm mentioned, he said, we have a generation of managers that aren't used to remote management. And listening to those comments, using the data, to help train and develop those managers so that hybrid can work better is, I think, something all companies should be thinking about right now. So back to a little bit more around the tech pieces. So the autonomous enterprise, as we've defined it, is about getting humans out of loops that they don't need to be in. And each of you sort of described this human-centric focus to designing experiences. So we know we put the human first. So how do you know what people need to still be in the loops for? What are the things that they really need to be part of, and what are the things that we can either automate, self-service, or have them self-ameliorate? You can go first.
I've got an example actually from retail banking. And in the UK, we've been measuring people's experiences with retail banking for the last 5 or 6 years. In 2018-19, 40% of all the experiences that people had with banks in the UK were what would be called owned channels. So going into a branch, going online, going onto the website, phoning the call center. Today, that's 60%. And that is because of apps. And what's interesting is when we look at the impact that apps are having, it's not just that they are many more times more important in terms of the number of experiences that people are having with them, but they are the biggest contributor to some of the changes and the positive changes in brand perception. They're empowering people to take control of their finances. So the ability to do a transaction while you're getting the children ready for school, I mean, we see those kind of comments. Great, it was all done, sorted out. And so it's really transforming people's lives. So I would say some of those kinds of transactional things are brilliant. But where we need to have humans, we noticed that at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, the first thing that everybody did in the UK when they were worried about if they could pay their mortgage, they got on the phone. And that was a major problem for the banks because they had to immediately get geared up with staff at home taking those calls. So I suppose it's when there are more complex issues, issues which involve empathy, people feel that they need to speak to somebody. But some of these other areas, businesses are empowering customers and they're loving it.
Maureen, you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the financial services, it really comes down to a couple things. There's risk, there's regulation, and there's culture. And, I look at, the ultra high net worth in wealth. I look at the hedge fund side of it, and they're very high touch. Do they need to be high touch? Probably not. I think a lot of that is a cultural that they just can't, you know, a lot of that could be automated, but they still feel that need. Then there's, you know, your risk tolerance. So, you know, you look at, you know, suspicious activity reporting and case management, and a lot of firms are still reluctant in putting in, you know, AI and more sophisticated technology in order to resolve those cases automatically where they could be done, but that's in fear of audit. So I think as firms culturally change and evolve, I think that will get better. I think, you know, specifically on the alternatives, I think they're having to change right now because the equity markets are down and you know, everybody's moving into the private markets. So you get into the scalability issue. So I think, you know, events bring people to automation. COVID was one of those. I think, you know, the market disruption that's going on and instability, pushing things to the private market is making the alternatives get more automated where, you know, it was very high touch, and that high touch wasn't required, it was cultural.
Mike, I want to ask you about something specifically because we both spent a lot of time in the contact center world, and designing experiences for interactions is one piece, and you both just touched on this. I think in some cases, there were some technologies that were implemented that perhaps weren't ready or they weren't well designed. And the one that comes to mind are these kind of failed chatbots, which created quite a bit of chatbot fatigue in our industry for quite some time because they were glorified FAQs, or they were broken, or they are actually just a hurdle to getting to a real agent. And it wasn't actually deflecting any volumes. It wasn't improving experience. In fact, it was making it worse. So it was, you know, it was basically a failed attempt at deflection of volumes, which ended up being a fail. In some cases, I'm not saying across the board.
Right.
But I'm interested in your thoughts, just sort of moving forward, you know, where this is going, in particular with a lot of the Gen AI, you know, LLM discussions we've been having the last couple of days, where that technology could, you know, could really make a big difference in being able to actually address experience as well as deflection, as well as, you know, just overall kind of improving experience. So would just like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've moved to three major industries in my career. So I started in technology, then I moved to, you know, kind of BPO, CX experience. And my premise for that move is I thought that automation and technology, it was ripe for disruption, ripe for innovation. And now I've kind of got back to technology as well as, you know, human capital. So why that change? It changes because I think many colleagues, many customers think they know. They think they know what process they want to automate. They think they know what's going to work. I'm just going to use one quick example on the health and wellness personal side for me. I thought that I needed a personal trainer, right? And I went and I contracted a personal trainer. The problem is I travel about 90% of the time. You know, but I thought I needed a personal trainer, right? So then I've changed to, I want to do a hybrid technology type approach. And I got a recommendation from a colleague, and he said, "No, you're a busy CEO, you've got to work with this individual." And I spoke to this individual, and I'm working with him right now. And it's game changing because he knows what I need before I even ask, because he knows what other 10, 20, 40, 50, whatever CEOs have been struggling with. And I'm listening to the struggles, and I'm like, yep, check. So it comes back to knowing your employees and knowing your customers. If you know your employees, you know, and you know the carols, back to Sandeep's example, then you can apply technology to address the areas of friction that can be automated, okay? But it starts with understanding your employees and clients, and then understanding, can the actual friction be removed through automation? And I've seen countless examples of chat bots being deployed that those two questions aren't well understood. And it just is, we've just deployed technology for the sake of, hey, we want to say we have a bot, right, on our website. You know, I do believe that what we're seeing with the revolution of now, buzzword of the day, not metaverse. It was metaverse 4 months ago. Now it's ChatGPT. I'm very optimistic that this technology is a game changer. I really am. I've been working with it, I'm testing it, I'm trying to deploy practical, grounded, operational examples of where the technology can either make my recruiters a hell of a lot more efficient and effective, and or predict outcomes in terms of candidate placement. And so far, the actual examples that we've seen are very interesting, very telling. Not enough to like get HFS in the briefing yet, but definitely going down that path, which means as long as you are focused on the employee and or the client and understanding specifically the areas of the process that are ripe for either efficiency and automation or able to drive a metric like fill rate or ratios that increase, then I think that this technology will disrupt many industries, including our own.
Fantastic. Keep us posted. I'd like to open up to the audience to see if there are any questions for the folks on the panel. Oh, sorry, right here, please.
Thank you. Hi, it was very interesting to hear how you guys are thinking about experience, but isn't experience a lot perception driven as well? You know, you're trying to do something, then it might be a great experience for somebody else, but the other person who's gone through something might come back and say, this is not a great experience for me. So how has the measuring structure evolved as you look at experience per se?
Perhaps I can take that. So thank you for that question. And you're absolutely right. Even with the same person, you might go onto the website the first time and have an amazing experience. But the next time, you don't find what you need, and that's a frustrating experience. And I think that's why we would say you need to try to measure these experiences as they happen, because just asking somebody in general, how do you find a website, it'll be good one time and bad another. And there's also that sequential aspect as well. So what we would tend to find in measuring is that an experience that somebody has, and it could be, if they are the customer, it doesn't matter whether it's advertising or online or conversation. In general, that experience will be more positively received than if you're a non-customer. And what that says to me is exactly what you're saying. It's the perception. You believe before you're meeting that brand and interacting with that brand that it's going to be positive, and you have that halo effect. Equally, it's the opposite way round, maybe if you're a prospect or you've had a bad experience in the past. So that perception is very important, but it is experiences that create that perception.
And I think demographics have a lot to do with it. You know, somebody recently asked me about, I guess in the UK, they're consolidating, you know, multiple branches of firms down into a single location, and it's for the elderly population. And, you know, my mother, I guess, is my Carol in this case of, you know, she still needs to go into the bank. She will not pick up the phone as seamless and as easy as an app that we loaded on her phone and pre-filled the, you know, everything for her. Absolutely not. So that's where, you know, ChatGPT, and, you know, I'm not one for technology looking for a use case. I think that becomes really important because I think you look at that demographic and that's an engagement they understand. You know, a seamless app versus a conversational. And I think, you know, when you look at things and measure it at that experience, you have to also look at the demographic side of it as well.
I think what you just said is fascinating because actually Halifax Bank in the UK, they created a special proposition at the start of the pandemic, which was a phone line for the over 70s. So they knew that that was a problem. But I think that had a positive impact on younger people thinking, at least my mum and dad can get hold of somebody. So that was really thinking customer first, I think, on the experience.
And I think just to build on that, the core is to give the customer choice and to really challenge your assumptions. What I've observed is when people make a mistake here, it's often the wrong assumptions. We may be even making a generalization based on demographics, but you must decide, is this a target market? What is our strategy? what is the message we're sending to the market, and is that congruent with the experience the customer has? And very often the challenge for companies has been and continues to be the folks making the promises, the marketing, the advertising, are not the same folks keeping the promises. The product designers, the call centers, the frontline employees. And when you have that dissonance, that's where the problems occur. Marketing tends to generally be a little aspirational. It gets a smidgen ahead of the reality. But if that gap is too large, then you get a frustrated customer. And very often, you touched on it, Adam, it's around a little bit the incentives. How were people rewarded internally? And very often, again, that's out of whack, because what I'm rewarded for in marketing may not align with what the call center is rewarded for, call times, call handle times, whatever it is. So there's a lot of heavy strategy lifting that no AI can do, but has to be done as a precursor to effectively implementing these tools.
Yeah, great points. Good. Any other questions? Oh, this one.
I just have a curiosity question. My businesses are all B2B. So I was just wondering, how do you get to the user experience of that B2B's customer? Like, do you coach your client on that, that business you're selling to?
Yeah, I'll maybe start with that. The short answer is absolutely. The closer we get to our customer's customer, the more value we're going to be able to provide in any type of solution that we deploy. So, I think of, one example. We have a customer today, we talk about, United Healthcare, right? One of the things that, United Healthcare is really leading on, and from my perspective, is they don't measure their call center agents, as an example, based on average handle time, because they want the actual member to be serviced. And one of the other things they know about their customers is many of them are different demographics, as you just spoke about. And I don't know about you, but I don't care what demographic I am. When I call a call center, I've exhausted all other opportunities, right? I am going to the app first. I'm going to their website or any type of digital solution. When I call, please don't, deploy conversational AI. And then once I actually tell you why I'm calling, then basically route me to some, queue that's not what I just said. Or even worse, ask me to repeat what I just said. Drives me absolutely nuts. And, one of the things I like about them is when I call United Healthcare, our employee healthcare is with UHC, I get somebody like that. I speak to somebody. I just spoke to somebody yesterday at a utility company, and I was dreading this call. I was dreading it. And I called, and somebody picked up. And I actually had to look at my phone. I'm like, wow, hello? Are you real? Yeah? And for me, I like that, right? Like, knowing your customer, like, I value that, I was calling to cancel the service, so I felt bad at the end, but I still valued that interaction, right? So knowing your customer, your point on demographics is absolutely critical, and understanding how they want to be best engaged in terms of how you support them is critical. If we know more about that for our end clients, we're going to be able to service with technology to help our clients.
Great, thank you. All right, so we just have about a minute left, so I'm going to ask you guys to do a speed round here. A couple of our panels have asked about, what's one wish you would have. I'm going to switch it up and say, what's one prediction that you have for experience in the autonomous enterprise, or even going further, the generative enterprise? Let's start with you, Fiona.
I think people will measure experience more.
I think simplicity will matter. Keeping it simple for the customer, the candidate, all stakeholders.
I think ChatGPT will be transformational, but I think we have a long time to figure out what are the right use cases where you can get that ROI and not try to put a square peg in a round hole.
I think we have to think through trust models between our colleagues and our developers of technology like ChatGPT, understand how trust can be formed and brought together between both human interaction and the technology, as I think there's going to be a lot of fear, especially on the human side.
Excellent. Well, Fiona, Margaret, Maureen, Mike, thank you so much for being with
Thank
me
you, Melissa.
today and sharing with our audience. Everybody give it up for the panel, please.